This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is for you. When this episode was released, Friday the 17th of March, I'll be on day 17 of an ice bath challenge. My intention was to do an average of 6 minutes in the bath for the whole of March. So in total, that would mean spending just over 3 hours in lovely cold water during the month. Now, if you want to check my Instagram account, at Mental Toughness Matters, you'll be able to see all the shenanigans and all the fun I'm having in this ice bath. Now, my reason for doing this is that I had a car accident. Not a major one, but a serious enough one for me to sleep on the floor for virtually 3 weeks of this year and struggle with a lot of back pain for 6 weeks from early January. And it's also resulted in me not being able to do a lot of things that I actually love since last November when it occurred, such as playing golf, running, and tennis, which is a sport I'd just taken up. So, after being curious and being signposted to cold therapy by a friend, then listening to the On the Mark golf podcast on the topic, I then came across Wim Hof's work. And yeah, I would check it out if I was you. It's very, very powerful. Now, one consideration for me was the fact that cold and ice would reduce the inflammation in my body from the crash. So, a little update. 17 days on, and after training in my bath bit by bit for 2 weeks, I'm happy to say that it's had an amazing impact on my life. On day 5 of this challenge, I slept through the night for the first time in 6 weeks, which was welcome to say the least, not just for myself, but for my family too, because it was having an impact at home, at work, and just in life in general. So that's right. Since day 5, back pain has gone completely for me, which has been fantastic. So the only thing I need to worry about now is trying to get back on the golf course or playing tennis, because I sustained some nerve damage in my right arm and right hand, which links to like neck pain, if you like. So naturally, being a right-handed person, playing golf or tennis just isn't going to happen right now. But I'm hopeful now that with this discovery that the nerve pain will keep on reducing, because it has so far, and that come April or May, I am going to be able to do some of these things. So I'll keep you posted on that. Now, as I say, time will tell, but I am feeling pretty optimistic. Mentally as well, I've got to say I'm feeling sharper than I have for a long time. I would liken it to a runner's high, where you float around on endorphins from long runs. So, yeah, I thought I'd share this little bit about me on the podcast, because up to a point it is relevant for today's discussion. At one point, we touch on self-talk from the angle of tackling in rugby. You know, imagine an 18-stone giant running at you, where you self-talk and run wild, where you're telling yourself just to get out of here, that you're going to get crushed, that you're going to get hurt. And essentially, this is what I've gone through every day for the last 17 days with the ice bath. Shall I get in? Shall I not? Oh, this is going to be cold. It's going to be horrible. That inner chatter has been on and on and on. And really, I've been getting ahead of myself at times. The fact it's been snowing and it's been icy outside hasn't exactly helped. So, self-talk really in sport is hugely important. It can mean starting with a 1-0 down mindset, or in golfing terms, you start off over par. And so many people get stuck believing their self-talk, essentially. They take themselves too seriously. So my guest today, Paul Phillips, he goes on to share some ideas on improving self-talk, certainly when it comes to the physical side of rugby. And we also talk about culture in rugby and in sporting clubs as well. It was a thoroughly enjoyable conversation, which I hope you learn a few things from. Hi, Paul. Would you like to just explain to the listeners a little bit about your background, your interest in rugby and coaching as well?
So started playing rugby from a very early age, from the age of about 5 or 6 years old, as well as involved with other sports. rugby took precedence up until the age of 17, 18, where I had to stop playing due to repetitive injuries and quite an extreme concussion. I then got directly into coaching, so I've been coaching now for about 17 years. Been very fortunate to be involved in different environments, in different roles within coaching, from a community coaching perspective and also progression into performance levels of coaching as well, and more recently off-field roles as well as a director of rugby, even lecturing as well within coaching, which has really helped to develop myself and the teams that I've been involved in. Yeah, hoping to get back into high performance now, alongside my consultancy.
Right. Okay. Ooh. So tell me a little bit more. You talked there about just the lecturing. What sort of things have you learned from that side?
I think the lecturing side, and as well academia as a whole, gave me a direction for learning, not just through other people, but also through research that has been conducted and being able to identify effective research that I can apply not just to the growth of myself, but my impact. And lecturing has really, teaching has really allowed me to also develop my coaching and develop my methods, which can positively impact a range of different people from different backgrounds. So it's allowed me to come up with adaptable ways of developing the knowledge of others, which is definitely something that's central to my approach within rugby coaching as well.
Yeah, I know certainly in my role, I see myself as an applied sports psychologist, but I have dipped into various different roles on a short-term basis and doing some teaching. And yeah, one thing it certainly does, it makes you take a step back, doesn't it? And like really reflect on how you go about your role. And there's something certainly to be said about self-improvement in that respect.
Definitely, yes.
And yeah, when you look at the typical challenges that rugby players have, what do you notice from your experiences in the lower levels, and then versus the more higher performing teams?
Yeah, lower levels, the fear element is quite intense. That was probably the biggest one I've come across, is the players who seem to surpass that in terms of performing well are more often those who are able to deal with fear or do not embrace it in any form or any capacity. They're very high level of confidence and highly aroused in terms of what they are playing for, in terms of the successes that they're looking for. But my interest was always in those who were not in, I suppose, the limelight to the crowd, and why that was. And tackling has always been a very difficult area within rugby in terms of grassroots and the level of coaching that is able to effectively deliver it. So tackling, is, as you know, is very multi-dimensional. They never really get two situations the same. So it's very difficult for coaches just starting off or in early years of their development to teach an effective tackle technique or multiple tackle technique. What kind of broadened my eyes to this was in 2014, I designed a tackling framework, analytical model for Wales under-20s for Byron Hayward. And it was a timeline format which could break down every possible attribute that's involved with a tackling technique. So, for example, how broken into three phases, how you approach the contact phase and the follow-through phase. So what attributes are involved within that when analysing. And then this provides quite a detailed account to coaches then of what that tackle looks like. So in all, it's about 52 variables, and then an outcome, what that looks like as well is there. So that has kind of broadened my mind even a lot further, diving into designing something like that. And it's still now when I see grassroots coaches trying to teach a tackle technique, and you can see they're teaching the basics really well. But what they struggle to account for is the unpredictable nature that rugby game produces, the speed of play, the whether they come in from a specific angle, the blind spot, for example, the power that's involved, the technique that's involved. It's very difficult to measure, not just in real time, but obviously when you're trying to break it down as a skills development. So obviously going off on a bit of a tangent here, but the new rules within the RFU, I can see why there's been a bit of a response, a rebellious response within that, because it is a very difficult area initially anyway. So it's going to be a lot of work to do to make rugby tackling as safe as it possibly can. And I think it's going to be a never-ending journey. Performance side is, I use this in the term of as how it affects performance, and that's the illusion of winning. And the reason why I call it the illusion of winning is is that they try to finish up the finish. They try to think about the finish line before the performance element. So this fundamentally comes back in terms of culture development. We look to establish our behaviours, our values first and fundamentally, and what our focus areas should be directed to. So central to my focus is the growing great people. The rugby element is the platform in which it's used from. So we try to instill that kind of focus to be inner focus, internal focus, as opposed to external focus and influence. And that's kind of been the foundations of the platform we try to set for our individuals involved, our players involved. Granted, there's some external influences which are very powerful, on the brink of success, for example, with the league success, especially when they're inexperienced with that. So trying to keep them, we're trying to go back to our foundations, our values, our behaviors, our approach, our preparation is clinical for that. So I think one of the common things within high performance rugby is the thoughts are normally generated first as opposed to the behaviors. So of course, sensation, feelings, the thoughts and behaviors are all paramount. They're all big contributors to high performance. But behavior tends to be the last step. Thoughts tend to be, what I've seen, the thoughts tend to be the first step. So we want to try and turn that around. So if we can instill the behaviors first, then the rest tends to follow from there. So I always use the example of going for a run. If you're not usually a runner and you're trying to motivate yourself to go for a run, you're thinking, and the problem with that is then you think yourself out of doing it. Whereas if you just got up and did it, chances are you're going to be going out on your run and you realize that it's not as bad as you initially thought it would be. So that then obviously leads into the fear factor. So those are the common themes I've noticed in community and hype.
Okay, so yeah, just what you're talking about there, even just the runner. I've just been doing some work today with a player coming out of a serious injury, and fitness obviously is one of the key things that they're looking at. And we were having this exact same discussion about how I suppose they're often feeling like they haven't done enough, and they're sort of second guessing themselves, that they're thinking in the future really, and then they'll compare themselves in the past. And we were just thinking of like, well, how do you just think about the moment, and how do you just do things? And literally, I mean, I think we've all been there on whether it's a run or a training session where the first 5-10 minutes isn't much fun, but sometimes you just got to just jump in, haven't you, and just do it.
It's exactly it. And I think the strange thing is we all know the answers because we tend to have had that experience before. We've done it where we tried it and we realize, oh, this is not as bad as I initially thought. But then we go back to that kind of restart where we're thinking exactly the same thing. I think a great tool that I've used for myself personally in the past was, I think it was James Clear's 2-minute rule in Atomic Habits. And he said, just use that 2-minute rule as a gateway to start in, to kind of break that thought mode and get straight into the behavior mode. So stops you procrastinating, stops you building that overthinking and talking yourself out of it. Whereas if you give yourself that 2 minutes, that gateway element of it, it chucks you right in, and you soon enough, quite quickly realize, not just in terms of your thoughts, but also physically, oh, this wasn't as bad as what I was thinking. So it tended to work for me in the past,
Yeah, I think unconsciously I followed that rule with that particular person, because we got to the point where we were, right, what really good questions can I ask myself? And it was essentially, it was that, what can I do in the next 2 minutes? What can I do now to affect this?
Exactly,
It's certainly a lot better than, what should I avoid doing, and et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk a little bit more about fear, and you talked about tackling in your 52 model, bit of like research you did there. So I'm guessing when it comes down to fear in a rugby player, when it comes to tackling, it'll be probably the size of the opponent. It'll be certainly probably one of the big factors in strength. Yeah,
definitely. In terms of the psychology element, high performance, I've also come across players who, similar to where you talked about coming back from an injury, where they've really struggled to build up that motivation to get into a tackle again, because that was what initially caused the injury in the first place. So as you so rightly say, when they see then a bigger player, a number 8 who is 18, 19, 20 stone, who's quite a quick, powerful, direct runner with the ball. Those feelings of the fear of that injury happening, or the fear of general hurt is very prevalent, is very high. So with this player in particular, we used visualization cues with this individual. So we tried to do a moment by moment of what that picture would realistically look like if following his movement patterns from analysis, what it would look like coming towards him. So how would he get in his preparation phase, his contact phase, and his follow through? And it seemed to really help the player. So we not just applied it obviously in a visual preparation sense, but we applied it into a field with a pattern movement player that we had in our team at the time. The beauty of that was we control the variables in our environment, right? So we can control the pace the player was coming at, and we could build up the pace. We could build, the power that our player was involved with, and also then measure those preparation phase, contact phase, and follow through phase variables in preparation for an effective tackle. And we did. We spent, I think it was about an 8-minute skill session on it, which built up into real life when we did a team run. And we had deliberate practice then when we had this acting number 8 to play in a system that the opposition was playing for to try to run directly at him. And the first 2 tackles were, you could still see there was that bit of cautiousness. His back was kind of curled up a little, which could cause a bit of injury. So we just pulled him to one side and went over those 3 trigger cues that we gave him at the time, which kind of helped him in the practice in the drill session. And once he used kind of self-talk with those 3 cues, once he got back in the field, he was making some really effective tackles. So we thought, right, okay, so he's in a good preparation and in a good mindset for the game then on Saturday. And there was 3 occasions where they met, same player, and there was 3 occasions where he made really effective plus line tackles where he actually pushed the player back. So this player was an outside centre, a number 13, against a number 8 who was 1920 stone. So that visual cue, that visual process that we managed to do with him was probably the pivot of that success. It really helped him. It may not help another player, of course, but it helped what he needed. And knowing the player was key to that. Knowing what he needed was absolutely essential about that relationship. So those 3 visual cues that we had was critical.
When you mentioned there what that worked for him, but it may not work for another person, I think that is critical, isn't it? Because some people are very visual. They've got very visual learning styles, and in that type of situation, they'll lap that up. Others might well be more kinesthetic or auditory, and they don't learn in that way. So it's got to be adapted, that approach.
Exactly.
And I know, just thinking aloud here, something I do as well if I'm working with an athlete and we're talking about maybe bravery in a tackle, I'll often get them to think what their brave face looks like. I call it like my brave face exercise, and we'll get them potentially, we look at a player that they respect and admire. They might look at an animal. Lion's the usual one when you think of bravery. And if it's a kid, sometimes like a superhero.
Yeah.
And then we bring that into the visualization there, where they're, as well as seeing themselves powerfully executing the tackle, they're seeing the lion or the superhero or whoever it is.
Yeah,
and it is massively powerful.
Yeah, I've used exactly the same technique with kids. So we've used metaphors alongside that, where, for example, if it's a specific superhero cartoon or a film that they admire, and we say, well, what do they look like in this situation? And what would they do in this situation? And we try to utilize that example in a metaphoric way that they can relate to, because, it also interrelates with, how you communicate as well. If we're very concise and using a metaphor, we can use 1, 2, 3 words. Or if we said, just remember, like we did in training, perform like a lion, they will know in detail what that looked like. That word association, that metaphor, they know what that would look like in that position. And that's worked, it's worked wonders, a metaphor. And like you said, that association is a fantastic tool to use.
Yeah, it just paints an instant picture, doesn't it? And something that you can go in and do in the moment.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
As well, going back, you were talking more about the performance side before, and like the culture piece, and it seemed to me that you were talking quite a lot about the key ingredients. You talked about behaviours and essentially the controllables, as opposed to focusing too much on the outcome. That was the impression I got. Yeah. So but yeah, let's say, can you offer some advice to some coaches on, how they actually go about that?
Yeah, success is always a big motivator. But what you can define as success is up to interpretation, right? So you can have, so for us, for example, we split success into kind of two parts. So we had our public successes, which was in the form of results in games, trophies, silverware, a win. And then we had our private successes. So they were our internal successes. So they could be the development of a player who could perhaps perform a little bit more positively in their tackling, which we've worked on in the week, or improve in defense, improve in points. So it could be individual, it could be unit, or it could be as a team. But they are very much in-house focuses. So I've used an example in the past with consistent winning teams. So Saracens being a prime example. So you can see from the Saracens that, yes, of course, there is an external motivated element to the play. Of course it is. There's always going to be. But how you balance that with the internal, I believe that the Saracens are more internally directed to their private successes, looking at the developing their players, developing relationships, developing partnerships, and coming up with new unpredictable styles of playing rugby and getting everybody to play catch up with them. And you can see that, I think, in their approach this season to attacking. This was kind of in fruition last season, and you can see that the players' confidence in what the coaches have developed there has been, pivotal to that. And they're trying things out, and then so if you can focus on, I certainly believe if you can focus on your private successes and can grow in the person first before the player, it's kind of casting that stone in a river, right? And the ripples then grow from there. The players then get better. You develop your relationships, the trust, the honesty develops, the cohesiveness between players and coaches, players and players, and coaches grows. And those dynamics, those micropolitics, it grows in a unison in terms of its direction. And that then influences the external, in my view.
So in some ways, as a coach, one of the things I'm picking up there is the coach has got to be very aware of their language and the type of communication, the things they're saying. So
yeah, definitely.
The coach naturally, results are your bread and butter.
Yeah,
but you don't want to voice that too much to the players. Otherwise, you end up, I suppose, building a culture of extrinsic motivation.
Exactly that, and I think even still now, I think the fundamental area for improvement can always be directed to communication. This can be on either how well you know the individual to communicate in a terminological way that is an understandable level. No, but not just that, but I think in a conciseness as well. Speaking, are they the type of individual who are receptive with individual words that kind of stick in their mind, or are they receptive to, okay, can we show the words in the practical sense, or are they, well, just show me in the practical sense? And knowing your players, knowing them as a person is absolutely pivotal. And I think this is where a lot of elite, certainly from my coach education days with a level 4 on the RFA, those who are coaching now at elite, they started off thinking very much, well, I'm the coach, the players should adapt to what I want to do. Whereas every environment I've never gone into, I've never been the same coach. I've always been a different coach. I've never been the same coach in 2 environments. I've always been different because that's the needs of what the people I'm engaging with need. And I think that is probably the biggest message I can give out, is adapt to their needs.
And that must be one of the most difficult things to actually do as a coach, to tailor your approach to the individual when you've got a squad of 20 plus players. Hats off to you on that one.
It's worth it. It's worth it. All the effort is worth the small victories and the big victories when you see them develop. It's worth it.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously the podcast is called Demystifying Mental Toughness. I'm intrigued on, what your definition of mental toughness would be in rugby terms.
Yeah, I think, especially from a psychology sense, it's the combination of resilience and confidence, and the level of resilience and confidence. So I am a fan of the 4 C's, and use that kind of as a framework for the development of the group that I do have. There are different levels. obviously of mental toughness. You do find that some players are more confident than others, some are more resilient than others. So how you approach that is very individualized. But you can also unify partnerships as well, as so you can spend your time a bit more effectively in developing that. So yeah, so for me, in a general view, the definition of mental fitness is the combination of resilience and confidence within a player.
Okay. So what I suppose one little element as well to me with the resilience bit essentially as well would be on the pitch, whether you're a coach, whether you're a player in a match situation, your emotional control is going to come into it. Yeah. This was something we touched on off air before we started recording. Yeah, I'm just wondering, do you want to just share with the listeners something you observed from in a football environment recently about a certain coach?
Yeah, definitely. So I was saying off air that my family are a very sporting family, and we watch quite a lot of football as well as rugby. And we noticed that obviously Arsenal, if you're an Arsenal fan, you have a fantastic season. And Mikel Arteta, the head coach, when things are going well, he's very calm, composed. You can see from his body language, he's quite still. He's very short in movement. But in contrast to that, when things are not going so well, he's very animated. His arms are flying all over the air. You can get a real sense of a negative energy. And this impact, I was analysing a few of the games and just to see how would his body language respond to the players. And indirectly, it seems as though that when Mikel Arteta is this animated, when things are not going so well, it seems to have an indirect impact on the players on the field. They seem to be receiving that body language, that information. And I've noticed that a lot of players are also becoming rather impatient, becoming erratic in terms of their decision making, and time pressed with pressure. Even though there are plenty of minutes and it only takes one moment to obviously score one goal in football, right? So they kind of lose that self-control. And I find that very interesting, of those external pressures affecting the internal decision-making and body language of that individual coach. What could he do internally that could display externally to have more of a positive influence on his players? I find it quite fascinating.
Yeah, and I suppose if you look at his squad, there's quite a lot of young players involved as well. Yeah. And not that many of those players have actually been involved in a fight to win the Premier League. Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be quite interesting actually over the next couple of months. Obviously, it's February now when we're recording this. How it all maps out, because as the finishing line draws closer, will his emotions keep spilling, and will the players? Yeah, I might do a study on that over the next 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to see the impact it has. Yeah, definitely.
Confidence was the other thing that you mentioned. So yeah, how do you go about breeding confident, fearless rugby players?
Yeah, confidence is, we do use motivational tools. However, we use motivation in a very short-term context. So this stems back to the kind of culture that we do develop. And we always try to apply a very James Clear-like element of just making those minor small victories. So those 1% improvements as often as you can. So we are a very we try to create a very self-aware environment which encourages growth. So, for example, when I was coaching in Otago, our team philosophy for the year was grow great people. And with the group of players that we had, we were first to defend the Ranfurly Shield. So the Ranfurly Shield works as though a team gets given the shield and they've got to defend it throughout a certain amount of games throughout the season. And we weren't favourites by any means to withhold that shield. We didn't have as many superstars as Super League stars as the rest of the teams did. But long story short, we maintained the shield the entire time and we held on to it for the entire year. We became Ranfurly Shield's winner that year. And the foundation for that is that we never focused on outcome. We never focused on the external outcome. We focused about that self-development within. So myself and Ben Herring, who was the head coach at the time, and also the other coaches involved, we would allocate ourselves a certain time throughout the entire year with spending more time with one player and obviously small snippets of time then with obviously the rest of the players individually as well. And our goal with that one player in particular was always to develop a key aspect of them as a person. So this was not necessarily to be brought into the rugby world, but also to be brought into their personal lives, their working lives, and whatever lives they got outside of rugby. And we saw this as a source of stemming confidence. Now, granted, this was dependent on the individual, whether they wanted to improve, and the level of ego that came into play, because we've all got an ego. Is how you maintain and control your ego. That's the key. So again, going back to relationships, that was the trigger for that. So we always had to try to find something that gave them that kind of spark, that little bit of a motivation to say, right, yeah, this is an area I could develop on, but something that they embrace with enthusiasm, that's very appealing to them, and it's something that they're empowered with, that they take ownership of. Because what we found is that when we planted that seed, it grew in itself. It became its own entity and grew within itself. We just facilitated when we needed to as an intervention, just to keep them on the right track. So that was kind of our approach to developing confidence. And when moments of adversity did pop up, we already prepared somewhat to, as much as we possibly can, right, of some of those scenarios that may appear on a rugby field. So, for example, when things are not going our way. So we created the metaphors, and we can either turn left or we could turn right. So right being the right direction, left being we have a choice, basically. So we presented with the players a number of some scenarios which are very traditional within a rugby game that could hinder a positive way of thinking. So, for example, if we got a yellow card, we got a man in a sin bin with numbers down, and they've already scored a converted try with, say, 5 minutes to go, say, for example. How can we respond in what we would say is an effective way, and what would hinder us? So we identified that hindering us was thinking about the score, thinking about the outcome. So that would be our turn to the left. That would not be the right direction to turn. Focusing on ourselves and trying to enjoy our rugby that we've always been doing, and focusing on maintaining focus on what we have been doing is the right choice, is the right direction. So we use that kind of metaphor. It was actually suggested by the players that we come up with that metaphor. We used the choice element then as a filter for that. And what we found with that metaphor is that it allowed them to make the right decisions to empower themselves with their own confidence. So when they were on the field, they didn't need a coach intervention. What they used was that metaphor as a trigger to initiate getting back on, I suppose, the right confidence track. And our feedback for that was it was a really effective tool that we used during that Radfield Shield season.
I absolutely love that. I'm guessing, did you get some of those ideas from the All Blacks by any chance?
Well, actually, no, we didn't. We used quite a lot from, I'm trying to think what sport it was. Hockey, I think it was. England hockey, Australian hockey, yeah, that was it. So Ben knew somebody with Australian hockey, a psychologist who worked with them in the past. And we had a kind of a consultation with that psychologist onto cues for confidence, because we knew the squad we had. We were aware of the squad we had. We were aware of their potential as people versus their potential as players. And we knew in terms of people that was the right direction. Despite it being central to both of our philosophies, it was the right direction to go down, to grow the person. So he kind of helped us with just some very easy cues but instead of just telling us the cues, which I'm glad he didn't do, he gave us a kind of point in the right direction. So we did the research on ourselves and kind of made it unique, and the variables unique then that would suit the players we had, in the environment we had, in the culture we had, and the matches that were values and behaviours that we promoted for that year. And so he gave us the seed, but we grew it.
Yeah, that must be a fantastic culture to be a part of as a player, knowing that you feel valued and respected, and someone really is looking out for you, in effect. Obviously, we'll both have been in environments where that certainly hasn't been the case, and it's been about the player and not the person.
Yeah.
And then obviously, I think from my perspective, the blame game often comes into play, and nobody wants to take responsibility. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. That's gold dust.
Yeah. And like you said, the blame culture, once that develops, you lose the changing room. And because at some point it will pinpoint to the coaches. And when it does, you can't win that back. It's very, very, very tough to win that back. We did a chapter in our book, and we said, if you lose the changing room, it's kind of the end game. You know, you're fighting a big uphill struggle. And there's not many coaches who can come back from that.
Yeah. In terms of then fearless, obviously in rugby, there's so many situations you really have to play without any fear.
Yeah.
Again, I suppose if we're thinking about coach communication there, what advice would you have for coaches in that respect?
I think the biggest thing is if you're going to come up with a cue that can really help a player, is to make sure it's personalized to them. I think one of the beauties, the great thing of modern coaching now is that information is so accessible with ease these days, which is great. But I suppose the hindrance with that is sessions and relationships, conversations which are designed uniquely for the individual they're presenting to and engaging with. But they're just taken from what they've seen online and applied to their session. But that doesn't necessarily work. So build those relationships, just human to human, not a rugby coach to a rugby player, human to human relationships, whether it is player to player, coach to player, and coach to coach. Build those relationships. They are absolutely clinical because that will give you the information you need instinctively, subconsciously, as well as consciously, to create and mold the right sessions needed for those who are receiving, those who are receptive, and at the given times you're delivering, whether it's early on or progressive. It helps to provide a bit of foresight as well. And also when you're analysing and the information you're gathering. So relationship is something that we all do every single day subconsciously, whether we like it or not, with everybody who we integrate with. But value that information. It is invaluable. That should be the foundation moving forward.
So yeah, clearly, again, this is very much about the personal touch from what you're saying. So it's great to obviously be well read on tactics, on technical elements to your sport, but yeah, certainly that personal touch is a huge thing as a coach. I've really enjoyed this conversation, to say the least, Paul.
No, me too.
Would you be able to share 3 key takeaways, from our discussion for the listeners?
Yeah, mood follows action. And that's something I touched upon right at the start, is that if you can generate what your behaviors look like in your environment, the mood is likely to follow. So if you're struggling to build that element of confidence and fearless players, if you can develop the person with the right behaviors, the positive effect of that will generate itself. Relationships are absolutely clinical. And never underestimate the importance of communication. Be concise, use metaphors to the point, and that's relatable information as well.
Fantastic. If the listeners want to reach out to you and have a conversation, get in touch, where can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Paul Phillips on LinkedIn. I've also got a book out called How to Create Culture in Rugby Union. My email address is also in that book. The reason for that is I'm hoping the readers engage with me to extend on further information, which thankfully a lot of people have all over the world, which is really heartwarming. That's also pphillips1987@hotmail.com. And I'm very respondent on emails and very meticulous with organized emails. So you will have a reply.
Fantastic. I will pop those details in the show notes alongside the book as well. And yeah, hopefully from the podcast, you'll get a few more sales there.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate your time.
Big thank you. Cheers. As Paul mentioned, and this relates to a lot of sports, not just in rugby, but certainly the physical side of the game can be quite daunting for some. They worry a great deal about getting injured. They focus far too much attention on their opponents. So Paul shared some great ideas there on preparing yourself for tackles. And this is an area which many coaching staff aren't so well versed in. Yet as sports psychologists, we go to great lengths to help our clients. Using the things he mentioned, cue words, visual cues, metaphors, and then taking it up a notch with visualization and sports hypnosis in one-to-one sessions and by creating audios. And this can be hugely, hugely powerful in helping players overcome fears like this. Now, going back to the start of the episode, I talked about my personal challenges and my March madness or fun jumping in an ice bath every day for 31 days. I'll reiterate, if you do want to follow me, please do check out my Instagram account at Mental Toughness Matters. You'll see me posting updates every day with 3 to 4 short videos each week where I offer tips for athletes, coaches and parents. This previous week, I've talked a lot about managing expectations, and self-talk has also been a topic which I've talked about frequently too, whilst being in the ice bath, of course, and freezing. And When we're talking about mental toughness and the name of this podcast, you certainly do need mental toughness to sit in an ice bath for 12 minutes in 2 degrees. Anyway, I'll leave you with that thought of you sitting in an ice bath for 12 minutes at 2 degrees. Thank you for listening today. I hope your week is warmer than mine is. Have a great time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. The Sport Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.